With the reveal of Starbirth a couple of days ago, the Pokemon community has been trying to figure out, well, what is best for the game, and are some of the cards that are coming out good for the health of the game? And today we're going to be talking about one of those cards in particular. Hey everybody, Nick from 9Card TCG, and today we're going to be talking about the return of Bench Barrier Mew. It's not exactly Mew, it's Manaphy, but it's still pretty much the same thing. But before we get there, I need your help naming this guy. It's a little Bulbasaur plant that I found on Amazon, and my wife picked out a really cool plant to go in it, and I'm terrible at naming stuff, so I need you to comment your best suggestion for what we should name this, and I'll pick one eventually. But yeah, that's so, and like, subscribe, comment, all that kind of stuff to keep this little guy growing. So yeah, if you don't, I will smash him. Now that we got that out of the way, let's go over to Pokegear, which is, we've used Pokegear a couple times now. It's a great website and created by Jake Gearhart, link in the video description. So let's go look at Manaphy and a bunch of cards that are going to be potentially impacted by it. So this Manaphy, this is a proxy card I created using the translation from PokeBeach, so shout out to PokeBeach for having the translation and images for all of the cards coming in Starbirth. Really cool site to get some news and information, and especially new card releases. So this Manaphy, Wave Veil is the ability, and it prevents all damage from attacks of your opponent's Pokemon to your bench Pokemon. Now, really there are only two decks that deal bench damage, and that is, of course, Rapid Strike Urshifu at V and VMAX and Jolteon VMAX. These two decks thrive. Their win conditions are by putting, not only knocking out a Pokemon on your opponent's bench, but by putting a lot of pressure and creating checkmate scenarios. And if you have Manaphy on the bench, well, now they can't do that as easily. Is this a death sentence for these decks? Some people think so. Some people think that Manaphy is going to be irrelevant for these decks, and I personally think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. These decks are definitely going to be taking a little bit of a hit because of Manaphy, but it is not going to be, at least I don't think it's going to be, the severe nerfing and just the absolute downfall of Jolteon and Rapid Strike Urshifu, like some people are saying. It's going to be a challenge that they'll have to overcome, and we'll talk about how they can, but let's talk about why this is important. So in the Evolving Skies meta, when the rotation first happened, or right before rotation happened, everyone expected Rapid Strike Urshifu to be the best deck, undisputed. It's going to be crushing everything. At the time, it had won a Players' Cup and it won a Players' Invitational, and it was winning some major tournaments back when Mewtwo Mew was still in the format, and back when Bench Barrier Mew was still in the format. So how it won with an incredibly powerful Psychic type, which it's weak to, and with Bench Barrier Mew in the active is amazing. But the fact that it won previously with the Psychic type and Bench Barrier in the meta, and now we have a Psychic type and Bench Barrier in the meta. Now, obviously, these are not true comparisons. These, they're not one-to-one, because the meta for pre-rotation is very different than the meta post-rotation. In the pre-rotation meta, we did have Jirachi GX with the Psychic Zone ability, which means that, well, fighting types, nothing actually has weakness to Psychic types, and that's something we currently don't have. So Rapid Strike Urshifu V, even though it could beat Psychic types in the past, really does struggle with Psychic types now. So that alone is a big difference. But, Bench Barrier was still a thing. So even if you account for the Psychic type weakness, well, what about the Bench Barrier? And obviously the easy answer is to use things like Boss's Orders and Pokemon Catcher and Cross Switcher and some other form of getting that Manaphy into the active, and then you hit it. It only has 70 HP, so you're going to be able to knock it out with a Gale Thrust that does 150. You're going to be able to knock it out with I always hit my mod, like my setup, and it makes my camera shake, and it's really annoying. I gotta find a better way to secure this. Anyway, you can hit it with 100 Furious Blows. You can hit it with pretty much anything stronger than just strafe, and you're going to be taking a knockout. Now, Manaphy has 70 HP. Why is that a problem? Well, historically, 60 HP was like the cutoff, because that's 3 Inteleon pings or Dragapult VMAX, which we do have on this list. Dragapult VMAX Max Phantom Attack does 50 to the bench, and you can spread that damage however you want. Now, let's make a distinction. There are 2 things we have to keep in mind, and that is the different, or I guess it's really one thing, the difference between damage from an attack and placing damage counters. So let's look at Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX before we look at Dragapult. Gmax Rapid, discard all energy from this Pokemon. This attack does 120 damage, keyword damage, to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Two of your opponent's Pokemon. Cool. So we are doing 120 damage. Manaphy prevents all damage done to benched Pokemon. So it prevents the Gmax Rapid from hitting the bench. It prevents Max Thunder Rumble, which does 100 additional damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. So we can't use the Gmax Rapid or the secondary effect of Max Thunder Rumble to the bench because it does damage. Dragapult VMAX, on the other hand, says place 5 damage counters. Placing damage counters and doing damage are not the same thing. Effectively, they have the same result. Pokemon loses health, but the manner in which the Pokemon is losing health is a little bit different. And the fact that this says you can place damage counters, you are not technically doing damage. I mean, you're doing damage, but it's not damage because of an attack. It's placing damage counters, which don't ask me how it's really different, but textually and effect-wise, it's different, even though the end result is the same. A little bit confusing, I know, but something like Galarian Zigzagoon, which says place a damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon when you play this from your hand to the bench, that's not doing damage. So knowing what places damage counters and what does damage matters a ton. So what you would used to do when Dragapult VMAX was really popular was you would just use the Max Phantom Attack, hit the active for 130, and then you would place 5 damage counters and hit something like a Galarian Zigzagoon. Boom. There's 60 damage, enough to take out Rapid Strike Sobbles and some other basic single prize Pokemon. Manaphy has 70 health, which means you can't do that immediately. You would need 4 Inteleon pings, because Quick Shooting also places 2 damage counters. You would have to use 4 double gunner abilities, or you would have to do 3 of those plus a Zigzagoon. Like, it's a lot of effort to just ping the Manaphy into oblivion. And also don't forget that the Quick Shooting Inteleons are stage 2s, which means you can't do it until at least turn 3. And that's assuming you run 3 that you can get out turn 3. If you only run, I guess you could still do it turn 3 with Scoop Up Nets and all kind of stuff, but still, it's a lot of effort and a lot of setup, and you're going to be running through your resources trying to make it happen just so you can hit something with Gmax Rapid Flow, and you wouldn't even be able to do it the turn prior. So a lot of effort. Jolteon does suffer from the same thing. So half of the argument is that it completely invalidates decks like Rapid Strike, Urshifu, and Jolteon, because now you're not able to hit the bench anymore. These decks that are going to be useless, and everyone's going to be running a copy of Manaphy to stop these decks from winning or from even being able to do what they want. But we still have things like Boss's Orders, and we still have other ways of getting Pokemon into the active spot. So it's not impossible, but like I said, it will be a challenge, and you'll have to use your resources. And Rapid Strike Urshifu has won in the past with bench barrier, so I don't really understand why this would be so different. Jolteon has and Rapid Strike Urshifu also now have the added bonus of running Inteleon lines that they used to not. Well, Jolteon didn't exist pre-rotation, but they're running lines and more consistency cards versus having to run Jirachi GX and all this kind of stuff. So, you're going to be a little bit more consistent, but you have to use that consistency maybe a little bit differently. The argument for having bench barrier is decks like Mad Party, which is a single prize deck, decks like Reggie Drago that normally can't survive in a meta full of Rapid Strike Urshifu because you're constantly doing 120 to the bench. They either can't set up or their attackers are constantly getting KO'd. They can't survive in metas with Rapid Strike and Jolteon because they're too fast and they have too much health and all this kind of stuff. So some people say, well, this is good for the format because it puts these decks in a little bit of a check and it allows other decks to kind of come out and have a better chance of surviving. And I do agree with that. I don't think it's... Does Rapid Strike Urshifu and Jolteon need any more checks than they really have, which is for Rapid Strike Urshifu is Mew, and for Jolteon is Rapid Strike Urshifu and Single Strike? Probably not. Rapid Strike is also walled incredibly hard by something like Duraludon. So, do these decks really need to be, checked more than they are? Probably not. But, I mean, I ultimately think allowing more decks and more archetypes into the format is a good thing. So while, yes, these decks are going to struggle a little bit with Manaphy, I do think overall it's probably fine. Most decks are going to be running one copy, maybe single prize 2. So if you're running against the single prize deck, you'll really have to be very careful about how you spend your resources and your effort. Again, maybe something like Pokemon Catcher sees a return. Maybe something like you start running a slightly higher boss count. Whatever, I don't know. Maybe some decks that haven't in the past start running Umbreon VMAX and you just boss it up like that. I don't know. Could a Jolteon Umbreon deck work? I have not a clue. And it would be kind of interesting to see. Are there ways of crafting decks and playing these bench hitting decks in such a way that, well, you can kind of negate the effects of bench barrier? Can you work around it? It would be interesting to know. Things like Jolteon and even Rapid Strike Urshifu, I mean, ultimately, another strategy is to just, I mean, not so much for Jolteon, but Rapid Strike Urshifu could still hit 150 to the active as a V. You could still run Sylveon. You could still run Vaporeon, which is hitting pretty active. So now you could start putting damage counters using something like Quick Shooting Inteleon, and you can start running Galarian Zigzagoon to start putting damage on stuff. And then Vaporeon VMAX now does 200 to anything with damage counters on it, which is far more than enough to knock out any single prize Pokemon. So, or any one single prize Pokemon. So there are ways that you can work around this, and then you get that Manaphy in the active, you knock it out, and then all of a sudden you start setting up your bench snipes, and you could start using things like, I don't know, Yoga Loops. Maybe you start hitting a couple of Inteleon pings, and then you place 2 damage counters with Yoga Loop, get rid of the Manaphy, and now your opponent doesn't have a turn, because Yoga Loop gives you a second turn, to put down another Manaphy, and you say, okay, now I'm going to start taking some 2 prizes with Gmax Rapid Flow. I'm going to start setting up the things I want to do. So that is another option. I think Yoga Loop into a Rapid Flow is very, very possible. It's a good idea. Jolteon doesn't necessarily have that. I think Jolteon probably gets hit harder than Rapid Strike does, considering that Rapid Strike and Single Strike is already one of its tougher matchups. So you're losing the Rapid Strike matchup because Manaphy will help you in that regard, and people might be less likely to play Rapid Strike, but Single Strike is still very popular. So while you lose Rapid Strike, you gain the challenge of bench barrier, and you still always have the challenge of Single Strike because they're not a bench sniping deck. So you also, Single Strike becomes a tougher matchup because now you can't hit their Houndours before they evolve, and that is pretty much the strategy for Jolteon against Single Strike, is try to take out those Houndooms as quickly as you can, start putting pressure on either like an Umbreon or an Urshifu on the bench, and try to checkmate them. That's pretty much the whole deal. But yeah, that's gonna be, I do think the more I talk about it, Jolteon really does have the tougher time with this. overall, like I said, do I really think that this is going to be just annihilating the bench snipe format? Absolutely not. We've already seen it happen in a format where bench sniping won some major events with bench barrier in the active. So can they overcome this challenge? Absolutely. And it's up to us as players to craft these decks and then pilot them in such a way that we can negate the effects of Wave Veil and Mana Feed to the best of our abilities. And who knows, maybe Rapid Strike and Jolteon and other bench snipe players are so crafty that people stop running Mana Feed altogether, because it doesn't help, and it's an extra card that they have to tech for that they just don't need anymore. It's not useful. Maybe this gives an opportunity for decks like Dragapult to come back, where Dragapult hits the bench still, but you're placing damage counters instead of doing damage. We don't really know what's going to happen until we get out there, start seeing it in action. What other cards we get with Brilliant Stars. Remember, the cards on Poker Beach, which, by the way, link in the video description, are all from Starburst, and we're going to be getting some stuff from Star Tech 100. So it'd be really interesting to know what's going to happen. Obviously, there is playtesting that you can do, but yeah, I think I'm just kind of rambling on at this point. So let's wrap this up. That's going to do it for us today. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, found it informative. If you did, let me know by subscribing, leaving a like, comment on the video, tell me what you think is going to happen with Rapid Strike and Jolteon with the addition of the Water Veil Mana Feed, which people will still probably call Bench Barrier or Bench Barrier Mew or something like that. So if you hear it, now you know what it is. I want to know your thoughts, and that's going to do it for us today. I will see you next time.